seeing the character sheet, which is one of the first things that as a player you'll do, you'll pull up, what does my sheet look like? What do I use? What do I physically need to play this board game without a board? In a lot of cases, they see this character sheet and it's kind of overwhelming. Now, previous editions have been far more overwhelming. 5th edition does a decent job streamlining things, but we're going to walk through the physical character sheet on a really basic level for folks. We're going to talk about some basic concepts. If you've never played D&D, if you've never played a tabletop, and it's just super overwhelming to you, we're going to keep things as simple as possible. If I overstep, if I stretch, if I presume some concept or term that I use is something that you should know and you don't, scream at me in chat and I'll stop what I'm doing and explain it for you. Think of it like, in math class when you've got the teacher who just assumes that you should know all these basic principles and starts wheeling off other more complex shit. You want to say, whoa, slow down, let's stop a little bit and run it through piece by piece. So that's what we're doing tonight for characters, although this is relevant for DMs as well, because sort of the latter chunk of this workshop, we're going to take everything that we talked about as far as how this sheet looks and works, and we're going to look at it in Roll20, which is a great tool and resource that you can use yourself to run some games online if you don't have a physical gaming group to play with in your city or your locale. So first thing that you see on the Dungeons & Dragons character sheet is that it's mostly empty. It's got a lot of these terms and a lot of blank spaces, and you got to sort of fill through with a lot of this information. For those of you who are wondering, you'll need to get that information from what's called the Player's Handbook. So most RPGs, they come out with some form of either single core book, or they'll release a core book for players, one for game masters, and then one generally for monsters or sort of expansions, and then from there you get a ton of additional supplementary content. So you're going to need the Player's Handbook. That's what I'll be using to fill out this sheet. If you don't have a Player's Handbook for 5th edition, however, you can check out what's called the SRD, the sort of standard rules document that they've got. Or yeah, you can just enter into our giveaway as it's whispered into your ear delicately and win a copy of the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, because we're giving those away because we have too many copies. So you can hit ! giveaway to see how that works. Thank you, Dio the Carney, for following. You're a gentleman and a scholar, and I hope you don't have small hands or smell like cabbage. But that completely aside, welcome to the adventure. It's good to have you for a Dungeon Master's workshop. So you're going to need the PHB, the Player's Handbook, to fill out your character sheet. But if you go to the SRD, if you Google Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition SRD, or OGL is the sort of license that it's referred with, you can find a lot of free content online that has sort of the basics of the rules. So I'll link you the SRD right now. If you want to be tracking and following along a little bit, this is just sort of an independent third-party website that's been thrown up that compiles a lot of the content from this big PDF that Wizards of the Coast released to say, look, we want people to play our game. Here's a free copy of some of the core stuff you need. Doesn't have everything that's in the PHB, doesn't have all the options, but it's a good place to start. So you can follow along there if you like. And it looks like Zero Hearts has already decided to follow along. Welcome to the adventure, my friend. You're a gentleman and a scholar. It is good to have you here as we're talking character sheets. What the hell is on my character sheet? So what we'll start with is sort of the important parts. I know at the top here it says, character name, and then some of the descriptors in this box on the right. But the real core content of your character sheet is this column on the left. Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. This sort of long column of squares. Now these are Silver Outcast. Silver Outcast, good to have you. Welcome to the adventure. You're a gentleman and a scholar. We are talking player characters and how to fill out your character sheet in D&D 5th edition. Oh man, all the follows. D20 Critter, good to have you as well. Gentleman, scholar, all the same things. Happy you're here as we walk through character sheet creation in 5th edition. So, like I said, obviously you're going to need a character name. You're going to need a class, level, backgrounds. We're going to talk about what some of that stuff means. But as far as what a tabletop RPG is, and here's where I'm trying to slow myself down, it's a sort of narrative shared story game where there's a player, I guess, who's running the session, the dungeon master, the game master. They provide narrative descriptions, prompts, describe what's happening, and then you take on the role of the character and you describe your responses and your actions going through the sort of story that they've put in front of you. Generally in a group of 3 to 5 folks will sort of put together for a party to run a session. Now, the core mechanic of what makes a tabletop role-playing game a sort of game is that instead of just having the freedom to say anything and everything that you want, so cool, my character's like 9,000 feet tall, and he's a god, and he's got this giant battle axe that can cleave planets in half. There are restrictions, right? So you've got a whole series of mechanical rules that utilize different types of dice, and those dice reflect different types of actions, the difficulty of those actions. So you've got this sort of quantitative numeric system of rules to complement the sort of narrative freedom that you have. So if the GM says, all right, the 5 of you, you're adventurers, you've come to this town, you're sitting in the tavern together, you see across the room there's a really suspicious looking elf who's got his hood up and he keeps eyeing left and right over his shoulder. And then at one point he finally like drops his drink and sprints out the door. What do you do? And you have these sort of back and forth dialogue style interactions. But when it gets to the point where you say, cool, I want to tackle that elf to the ground and punch him till he's unconscious, you're not necessarily going to have the freedom to just succeed at everything that you want. So the sort of general rule of thumb is if there's a task where there's a chance that you could fail, where there's significant consequences of you failing or succeeding, then the GM will ask you to roll a dice. And sort of the dice end up replicating a degree of randomness and provide that sort of game elements to keep things balanced. So in order to have those dice function as a reflection of the character you've designed, rather than everyone just rolling the same types of dice with no difference at all, you've got a character sheet that's populated by quite a few numbers. And those numbers reflect elements or aspects of your character that are then going to enhance or decrease the effectiveness of you doing certain tasks, if that sort of makes sense. That's your core concept. That's the sort of balance on the character sheet between numbers and the sort of descriptive text. Ooh, voice went robotic. We'll check on Will's end. Should be good. We are restricted to our internet, of course. We do our best. So that's what we mean when we say that there's going to be numbers as well as descriptive text on your character sheet. And the numbers that are in that left-hand column, Gwen's right, Canadian geese flew past and disrupted the single stream of internet tube wiring that runs through Canada. The numbers along the left-hand side: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Those are your core ability stats. Core stats that any character would have, just like Pearl Saul 01. Good to have you. Welcome to the adventure. My friend, you're a gentleman or woman and scholar. Welcome to our DM workshop. But tonight it's more of a PC workshop, I think. So one of the first things you want to do when you're coming up with a new character is you want to start thinking like conceptually, what type of person are they? What type, if you're playing in a traditional fantasy game with different races, are you going to play as a dwarf, as an orc, as an elf, as a human, as a gnome, a halfling? Any kind of open-ended radial discussion brainstorming is a great way to start because you don't want to dive right into the nitty-gritty of the mechanics. You want to think of who the character is. And there's certain styles of play that lean more towards very mechanical sort of wargaming type play, and that's great too. That can be a lot of fun. And in that context, you may start with a build concept or some numbers instead. Gwen linked one of my favorite random character generators that instead of giving you numbers, gives you, who the fuck is my D&D character? It's a really funny random generator built off of, I think the original one was, what the fuck am I making for dinner? Anyways, it's like a pre-built Java webpage that you can make mirrors of, and it's a lot of fun. So you come up with your character concept, and then you sort of go from there. So for today, I'm going to build a basic character. Not going to get too into detail of like why I'm choosing certain things. I'm just picking a character that's going to allow us to sort of look at all the different elements of this character sheet. So right off the bat, I want to play a dwarf. Sometimes I play dwarves. I had a really fun one that I played in some of our games with XP Web Series. You can check it on Twitter. But I don't often play dwarves. That was one of the first ones I'd rolled in a while. So I'm going to roll another dwarf. Alignment, don't know what that is. I guess I'll have to find out as we go along. Player name, this is going to be Mitch's dwarf. Background, not sure what that is either. Class and level, well, I know I'm probably going to be level 1, but not sure what the class is going to be yet. Now, as a dwarf, I want to, I want to be able to fight. I want to, be heavily clad in armor. I want some decent sort of combat stuff. I don't want to be wearing leathers. I want to wear like metal, like a nice helmet, have a shield maybe. And I think I might want to be a healer of some kind. So I'm going to roll him as a cleric. And if you want more information on the classes, head to that 5E SRD site, and you can see descriptions of all these concepts and classes. So I'm going to rock a dwarven cleric. Now, without knowing what any of these ability scores means too much mechanically, I can sort of start to fill them out in a way that is meaningful and sort of works. You don't necessarily need to know every skill associated with a certain ability. You don't need to know all the different things your abilities do. They're kind of intuitive. So as a dwarf, I want to have a shield, heavy armor, and a mace of some kind that I'm going to whack goblins with. So I probably need to have decent strength. I don't know what decent means. So we'll just go from there as far as setting out our ability scores. So you've got 6 of them, like I said. And as you can see in the SRD, the way that most games start is by rolling for ability scores. Now there's a bunch of other options. There's other methods to go about getting your stats. There's different tables and trees for ways to sort of balance if you've got this number here or that number there. Generally, having a 10 in any ability score is sort of the standard adult, non-heroic adventuring person in a game world in 5th edition. So 10 is sort of your landmark. When you've got a 10 in an ability score, you never get any kind of positive or additional help when doing a task relying on that ability, but you're also not suffering any kind of detriment. There's no negative associated with it. So having a 10 is sort of your middle mark, and then things fluctuate left and right from there. So in the player's handbook, it says when you start a new character, when you're rolling abilities, you roll 4 6-sided dice, so standard gaming dice. You roll 4 of them, as I'm going to do right here, and you take away the lowest one. So I'm going to get rid of this 1 here, which leaves me with a 5, a 3, and a 4. And so adding the 3 highest together, that's one of the numbers that you have for your abilities. So that gives me 9, 12. So I've got a 12 in one of these abilities. I don't know which one it is yet. I get to choose where I punch in these numbers, but I need to do that 6 times. So I'm going to roll this out again here. I've got a 6, 10, 14, drop the 3, roll 4 again, 8 and 5, 13. These are pretty balanced so far. 5, 9, and 11. Ooh, here's my first dud. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got an 8. And last but not least, oh, this one looks good. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Cool, so the stats that I ended up with, and I'll write them right here just so that you guys can see them. I've got an 8, I've got an 11, I've got a 12, a 13, a 14, and a 15. So couldn't have really gone much better as far as balance. Generally, by rolling 4 and dropping 1, you're going to have a better chance of getting above 10, but there is still a chance that you'll get below 10, which is interesting because it adds some flavor or texture to your character. So now you have to pick where you want these ability scores to go. And as it's your character, you get to choose which one of these numbers goes into which of your stats. So like I said, I wanted to have good strength, but I don't think strength should be my best because I know clerics can use some magic. I know they have some healing spells. They sort of access divine magic through their religious association or affiliations. So I want to keep my best skill for some kind of magic stuff. So I'll take my next best one. So I'll take 14 and put that into my strength. So I put 14 in there, and I get rid of it on my list. And then I go through and populate the rest of these. So I know offhand, but you can find in the player's handbook that when a cleric casts their spells, it's using their wisdom score primarily. So I'm going to put my 15 there in wisdom. Constitution is your health. It's how hearty you are, how hard it is for you to die, resisting things like poisons, taking damage, all that kind of stuff relates to your constitution. So as a dwarf, that should be okay. So I'm going to put my 13 in there, my next highest. So now I'm sitting with my 8, my 11, and my 12. So these last scores, intelligence, dexterity, and charisma, again, fairly intuitive. Charisma is how sort of socially adept you are, how good you are at lying, convincing, persuading, that kind of stuff. Intelligence is just raw logical processing power. Zombie Warrior, where did I get a form fillable character sheet? I don't remember. Just Google form fillable PDF D&D 5th edition. There's quite a few out there. Intelligence is like raw processing power. Wisdom is more sort of intuition. Touchpad does make the good point that poison doesn't really apply because I'm a dwarf. I know, we'll get there. I'm trying to keep it slow. I'm trying to keep it slow for now. Okay, so dexterity is how quick on your feet you are, how agile you are, things like sleight of hand checks, sneaking around, balancing, acrobatics. That's all dexterity based. As a dwarf, I don't think that's going to be so hot. I don't think it's going to be the best. Don't know if it's going to be terrible, but given that I wear mostly heavy armor all the time, I've got this sort of strength-based concept behind how this guy trudges around. We'll put 11 there. So not exceptional, not really above the norm, but definitely not detrimental. So I've got intelligence and charisma left, and I've got a 12, and I've got an 8. Now, do I want this dwarf to be like worse speaking with people or worse with data. So I want to think like the character, the concept, you know, if he's religious, some type of priest of some kind, some type of warrior priest, to have his cleric affiliation. He's probably done a little bit of studying, like a decent amount of reading associated with his faith. So I'm going to go with the 12 in intelligence and put my charisma at an 8. So that means because my charisma is less than 10, I'm definitely going to have a little bit more trouble than most characters when I'm trying to roll to persuade, deceive, do any of that kind of social interaction stuff. So now I've got my core stats. These are probably the most important parts to your character sheet. As Madman82 would know, welcome to the adventure, my friend. You're a gentleman and a scholar. If you miss any part of this tutorial, you can always watch it on YouTube the next day, as it'll be up there. +2 whiskey of intuition as we continue on. So when I said that 10 is the score that's in the middle, which means there's no positive, there's no negative when rolling your attempts, when rolling your actions mechanically. Now we need to punch in how plus or negative, you know, what these modifiers are based on these scores. So there is a table, there's a sort of conversion charts. This is a long running tradition in Dungeons & Dragons as a mechanic, where depending on the number you have, you end up getting a smaller modifier, if that makes sense, to add to your dice rolls. So the standard dice, let's grab a d20 here. The standard dice that you roll to make checks, you know, I want to tackle that suspicious elf before he leaves. Make your attempt, you roll a 20-sided dice. And when you roll the 20-sided dice, you're going to have a certain number that you get to add to it. So you'll roll, rolling an 8, but you'll add, let's say, 6, so then your result is a 14. And you ask the GM, and they tell you whether or not a 14 is high enough for it to work, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to find out what these ability scores translate to in terms of a modifier to your d20, because you don't add 14 to your 20-sided dice. That would be huge. There's like a progression table that shows how much you add or subtract. So I know offhand just from working with these quite a lot, so I'm just going to punch in what these are. So a 14 is a +2, 13 and 12 are +1. My 15, oh, there you go, page 13 for folks who are on the PHP. Let me see if it's actually in the SRD as well, because people can actually track in the SRD. Yeah, it is, right under ability scores, right at the top on the left. On the SRD, you can see this as well. So 15, I've got a +2, and charisma, a -1. So now I have my modifiers in terms of what my stats actually turn into. And now we can start doing a little bit more populating. Proficiency bonus on this sheet. This is an interesting mechanic in 5th edition that they use. It's a fixed progression. It's just a little number that you add to all of the rules that you're proficient with. And I'll talk about proficiency in a second. In 5th edition, it's a way to sort of standardize and equalize across the board all of the classes. As you level up and get more powerful, they want there to be just this standard little tick that everything that you're doing gets a little bit easier in terms of how much you get to add to your rolls, because they know that the world is going to get tougher, the monsters are going to get stronger, et cetera, et cetera. So as a level 1 character, your proficiency bonus starts as a 2. So we'll just punch that in for now and keep that in mind. Also, you guys can throw up whatever name you'd like for this Dwarven Cleric, and we'll take whatever name you choose. So probably the next most important aspect of the character sheet is the next column over. It sort of moves from the left to the right. You've got these boxes here that have saving throws and skills. Now, these are the most common active rolls that you're going to make. Saving throws are sort of a defensive roll. It's a roll that you make when something is trying to be done to you in the world related to one of your skills or abilities. So most commonly, a dexterity save sort of makes the most intuitive sense. A dexterity save, if dexterity is how quick and light on your feet you are, a wizard casts a fireball at you. Instead of determining whether it's affected by the fact that you're wearing plate mail or not, the first thing is whether you can get out of the way in time. So you're given the opportunity to make a saving throw, to make a roll, and the GM will tell you when to make these rolls. You have the opportunity to make a roll to avoid something bad happening to your character. So if it's a dexterity save, it's getting out of the way. A constitution save would be you've just ingested poison. Make a constitution save to see if your body can just like repel the influence or the effect of it, whether you can sort of muster through. Intelligence saving throws can be against things like spells that affect your mind. I've also used them for things like if a player wants to try and remember a useful fact or detail that they don't necessarily, know right off the top. They say, oh, my character, he's been to that city before, but like we've never played a session in that city. Does my character know anything about it? Maybe make an intelligence save to see if you remember that detail. Strength save, of course. I gotta hold this door barricaded shut for as long as I can. You'd be making strength saves. So these modifiers, or the numbers that you punch in beside your saving throws, are literally just a combination of your proficiency bonus for the saves that you're proficient with and the modifier for the ability. So without talking about proficiency right now, although Mixley may want to, Mixley, however you pronounce your name, it's good to have you. Welcome to the adventure. You are a gentleman and a scholar. Adric Ironfist, I like that. I see that name, and we're punching it in. Oh. Adric Ironfist. Cool. So your saving throws are going to be a combination of the modifier, so the smaller number that's underneath your ability score, as well as your proficiency bonus. But how do I know which saving throws I'm proficient with? How do I know which skills I'm proficient with? Skills function in the exact same way. If you look underneath, each skill has its relevant ability score in brackets next to it. So if you say, I want to try and sprint faster than this guy who's sprinting away, the GM may say, make an athletics check. And so you would look at your athletics modifier, which would be a combination of whether you're proficient or not, and what your strength modifier is, because it's a strength-based skill. So once you've got your core abilities, then you have to find out what your proficiencies are. So what is my character proficient with? Now, previous editions of D&D had sort of scaling point systems where you purchase like multiple levels within different skills and things that you're proficient with. In 5th edition, proficiency is a yes or a no. If you are proficient in athletics, then you tick the little bubble right beside it. And then every time you roll in athletics, you add your proficiency modifier, which is going to continue to get a little bit higher as you level up. So it automatically sort of takes away the math of having to purchase the point by each level. You get 2 more points for your skills. Okay, I want 1 in athletics, I want 1 here. If you're proficient with it, then the game is naturally going to progress it for you through the table of the increasing proficiency modifier. But you need to find out you need to find out which skills and saves you're proficient with. So let's go back to our first question. I said I wanted to be a dwarf cleric. So it would make sense to open up the PHB to the page on dwarves and learn about all the different things that I get from dwarves. Because of course there's lots of great text that Wizards of the Coast has written about dwarves, society, religion, adventures, relationships, culture, names, etc. But they also give you the mechanical side of things. So when I look at the dwarf traits, I see first of all, ability score increase. Your constitution score increases by 2. Look, that is sweet. So I'm going to punch that in. My 13 is now a 15, and that's permanent, which means that my constitution modifier also goes up to a 2. Cool, so that's the first thing that dwarf gives me. Second, it talks about age, size, that sort of thing. Can I roleplay? What does mechanical mean? Mechanical as in the mechanics side of things, the numeric, quantitative, numbers-based form of dice resolution for resolving conflict or actions within the system. So when I say mechanics, I just mean anything where the player doesn't have complete freedom to describe whatever they'd like, where you need to bring in some kind of rule. Yeah, no worries, that's a good call. So determining what dwarf gives me now that I've chosen to be a dwarf, it says my size is medium, so I guess I can punch that in. I think size, where is it on this sheet here? Age, height, eyes, skin, hair. We're gonna put size under height just for now, and I'll tell you why that matters in a second. All right, so dwarf says that I'm medium. Got it. Speed says the base speed is 25 feet, so I can punch that in here. 25 feet for speed. What's next? Dark vision. Accustomed to life underground, you have superior vision in dark and dim conditions. You can see in dim light within 60 feet. You can't discern colors, only shades of gray. Cool, so we're starting to get into these like abilities or features that dwarves have. And the good spot to put those on the character sheet is right over here on the right. So bottom right, you've got features and traits. I think is what they call this box, and it's extended. There's a second features and traits box that continues down here on the second page, because you will end up with too many. So I'm working through, I need to punch into the sheet everything that dwarf gives me, then I'm going to punch in everything that class gives me. So let's put a sub here for dwarf. So first thing, I get dark vision. And you can use some sort of shorthand, whatever works for you. So dark vision, 60, dim, no colors. Next thing that I get is Dwarven Resilience, and this is what Touchpad was talking about. As a dwarf, I have advantage on saving throws against poison, and I have resistance to poison damage. So I'm going to put Resilience, and it's advantage against poison and resistance against poison. Now, in mechanical terms, and this is getting into a little bit of how the rules work in 5th edition, so I won't dwell on it because I want to keep talking about the sheet. Advantage is a mechanic that allows you to have a roll be much easier, where instead of rolling your d20 once for your attempt, you roll it twice and take the higher number. So having advantage on saving throws against poison means that I'll get to roll twice every time, which increases my chances by quite a bit at succeeding against poison. Resistance means I just cut the damage in half. So if I do take poison damage somehow, I'm only going to take half as much as a character who doesn't have resistance to poison. What else do I get as a dwarf here? Dwarven combat training. So I get proficiency. So again, I was asking, what are my proficiencies? Proficiency with certain types of weapons. Okay, so we can put this down here. Bottom left, you've got other proficiencies and languages down in this box. So there's the skill proficiencies that you bubble in, and then there's additional proficiencies. So I get some weapons here. Battle axe, hand axe, pages cut off, light hammer, and warhammer. Got it. Tool proficiency. As a dwarf, I also gain proficiency with the artisan's tool of my choice. Smithing tools, brewer's tools, or mason's tools. I'm going to take smithing tools. I don't think I'm necessarily going to use it with this character, but I'll put that down here just so that I know that I have that proficiency, because again, it never goes away. Stone cunning is the next ability I get. Whenever you make an intelligence history check related to the origin of stonework, you're considered proficient in the history skill. So if I don't take history as a skill that I'm proficient with, when we get to choosing your skills for your class, if it's a history check related to stone, I still get to pretend like I'm proficient. So I would add the +2 to my roll on the attempt. So I'll put that over here just as one of my general features. So stone, stun cunning, stone cunning. And it's proficiency, history, and stone is how we'll mark that. And then, of course, languages, I need to be able to speak Dwarven, and that's right in there too. So I get Common, which is kind of the catch-all for not English in Dungeons & Dragons, and then Dwarven as well. Interestingly, Dwarven and Orcish use the same alphabet. I know there's some folks that are super into that, but that is there. Now, when I keep scrolling down to Dwarf, it says I need to pick a sub-race. So in D&D, you pick a race, and then there's branches within each race that allow you to do a little bit more customizing. And the same applies to your class. So as a cleric, there isn't just one set of abilities that I get. There's a couple options to choose and select as a cleric, which we'll talk about as well. So I can be either a hill dwarf or a mountain dwarf. I think I'm going to be a hill dwarf because it gives me an increase to my wisdom score by 1, which puts me at a 16, which makes this a 3, and this is all according to the tables in the PHB, because I said I wanted my spellcasting to be really good. And I also get Dwarven Toughness, which increases my maximum hit points by 1 and increases them by 1 every time I gain a level. So I'll write that in here because we haven't done hit points yet. But as a hill dwarf, I get increase HP 1 per level. Just so that I remember, so I've got it on the sheet. Tons of follows here. Thank you, Red with a Fez, for following. Welcome to the adventure. Annexus and Lilsey, it is good to have all of you folks here, gentlemen and scholars. We are walking through the D&D character sheet, 5th edition. Very basic stuff. If you missed any part at the beginning of this workshop, you can always tune in on YouTube. Within 24 hours, we'll have this up tomorrow if we can, so that you can watch it from the beginning. Very basic stuff. If you have any questions about terms, just fire them away. I'm trying my best to do this slowly and to make sure that I don't presume anyone would understand any of the terms that I'm using. So we've decided that I'm a Dwarven Cleric, and we've picked my ability scores on the left. And so we've got the modifiers that I have to work with. Haven't done proficiencies really, haven't done skills, and haven't done weapons or any of the cool stuff there as well. So as a dwarf, I think I'm pretty much finished. I went through all the stuff on dwarf in the player's handbook, found out that it gives me a little bit more constitution, gives me dark vision, resilience to poison, stone cutting, and then choosing hill dwarf, I got a little bit more wisdom and a little bit more HP. And then of course, my dwarven common language proficiencies and some weapon stuff as well. So looking through here, okay, doesn't look like there's a whole lot more on dwarf, so I move on to cleric, which is the next big thing that I decided. So here's where you start to see a lot more of the mechanics or how the numbers or the rules play in to sort of relate to the narrative stuff that's behind your character. So as a cleric, it says my hit dice is 1d8 per cleric level. So I'm going to put that in under hit dice here. As a level 1 character, I only have one of them. Now, again, what this means for the rules of the game is you're allowed to roll your hit dice. So this determines how much health you have when you make your character. Every time you level up, you re-roll that d8 and add that number to your maximum pool, which gets bigger. And then within a session, when you stop to take rests, you're allowed to roll those hit dice based on the number that you have. So as a level 1, you've got 1 hit dice. So 1 re-roll to like give you a little bit extra health for that session or that adventure. So the bigger the hit dice, some hit dice are d6, d10, d12, d8. The size of the hit dice increases just the general chance of having more health across the board. D8's kind of in the middle, not too bad. As a first level character, you just take it as a maximum and you add your constitution modifier to how much total hit points you'll have. So with an 8 plus 2 for my constitution and my cool dwarven ability from being a hill dwarf plus 1, I'm going to have a total of 11 HP as my maximum. So you put your maximum up there so you don't remember. And then here, you can keep your running tally. If this wasn't a digital sheet, this little box underneath your current hit points, you'd be able to like scribble that out, erase it, and keep updating it. As you took damage, you know, received healing, took some rest. How's it going, Courtney? So it would be all good. Temporary hit points is slightly different. Those come from certain abilities, spells, there's a couple concoctions, vials, potions, things like that. Temporary hit points, they don't actually adjust your real hit points, if that makes sense. So if you receive a spell that gives you 3 temporary hit points, you could never go above 11. But let's say you're at 8, your max is 11, and you gain 3 temporary hit points. Eventually, the effect of those temporary hit points will wear off. And when it does, you would go back down to 8. But for the purpose of that immediate moment, determining when you're going to drop unconscious, you've got 11 functionally, if that makes sense. So that's a unique thing, but they've got a big space there. Again, when you're not dealing with the digital sheet, if you're just working with a physical paper sheet, these boxes are, you know, decently sized relative to previous editions to allow you to do some working, like erasing and scribbling. I know I've got some sheets from some 3.5 games that I still have running that are still a lot of fun, but those sheets are just so old, they're just like stained and just erased and rewritten on 1,000 times, and it's a big, hot fucking mess. So it was nice to see the 5th edition sheet expanded some of these text boxes a little bit. All right, so we've got my hit points from being a cleric. Now, what else does being a cleric give me? It says I get some proficiencies: light armor, medium armor, and shields. So I'm going to put these down here with my proficiencies. Light armor, medium armor, shields. That'll be good to know. Simple weapons and no tools, except the smithing tools, which come from dwarf. So simple weapons. So now I've got a sense of what my character's like trained or practiced with, rather than just picking up something off the street, never having used it before. That's what the proficiency sort of represents, that static number that adjusts as you level up. Now here we get into some more. So saving throws. I'm proficient with wisdom and charisma saving throws. So I tick these little bubbles. So those are the saving throws that as a cleric, you know, I've spent time, you know, in life doing some form of religious study or faith-based practice, and that's given me a particular edge or advantage when dealing with wisdom or charisma-based things that are sort of confronting me. So we're gonna now punch in these saving throws because we have everything we need. I don't have proficiency in the other 4. I just have the ones given to me from my class. So now we can punch in what these numbers are gonna be. So my strength is just a +2, that's my modifier. My dexterity, my tab doesn't quite work. Dexterity, don't get nothing. Constitution, +2. Intelligence, +1. Wisdom is +3 from my wisdom score, but it's also +2 for my proficiency. So I get a +5 on wisdom-based saves, and my charisma is proficient, but I have a -1. So -1 for my score, +2 for the proficiency, which is going to put me in a +1. How's it going, Rafira? Good to see you, bud. We're working through 5e sheets for new folks who've either never played D&D or have never played this edition. So we're taking it slow, but it's all good. So now I have these numbers. They're kind of cut off a little bit. Hopefully you can still see them okay. So now if the GM says, all right, I need you to make a strength save, you know, okay, you're making some kind of check, you're going to roll your d20, and you look to your saving throws, strength, +2. Add your +2 to whatever the dice comes up at, and that's the number. And then the GM tells you how well that number did and what your outcome is going to be. So wisdom is one that I'm pretty strong with, so that's cool. That's good to have. So the same rule is going to apply for skills. Even if you're not proficient, you're still always going to be able to add your ability score, which is in brackets to the right of the name of the skill. You'll be able to add the ability score modifier to your attempts when making rolls. So let's see what skills I'm proficient with. What are some of the options that I have? So as a cleric, I can choose 2 from a list of skills: history, insight, medicine, persuasion, and religion. So for sure I know I'd like to take religion, and maybe because I'm really shitty at persuasion, I'll take persuasion. You know, I've got this very low charisma score, which can sometimes reflect just not being that attractive looking. So maybe I've got like a really crooked nose as a dwarf or something like that we can punch in later on. So I got this crooked nose, not very good looking, so I'm working at a disadvantage. But let's say I sort of worked as some kind of traveling something with my monastery. So it did lots more interaction than the average priest who stays cloistered and doesn't see the outside world. So I'm proficient in persuasion. So we'll take persuasion and religion as the 2 skills that I'm proficient with. And then you can punch in these numbers the same way. So dexterity, and I'll just do a couple. I'm not choosing athletics for now. So dexterity. Oh, that chat is flying. Grim 365. Good to have you. Welcome to the adventure. You're a gentleman and a scholar, and we are glad to have folks tuning in, because this is a workshop people have asked for quite some time. And we get so caught up in running 1,000 D&D games at various levels and different systems and homebrew that we kind of forget to slow down a little bit and just walk through some basics. All right, so having a 0 on dexterity, I'm going to have a 0 plus or minus to my rolls on an acrobatics check, but the skills that I'm proficient with are going to get both the ability modifier and the proficiency bonus. So again, my persuasion, I've got a -1 from charisma, but a +2 for proficiency, so it makes it a +1, so it brings it up into the positives. Let's just put 1 there for now. And religion is going to be my intelligence, which is a 1, and my proficiency 2, so that's going to be a 3. So you can fill out all those skills on your sheet. You punch in whatever number is relevant so you know what you're working with. So when the GM says, give me a nature check, give me a survival check, you roll your d20 and look to see what your relevant modifiers are. All right, what else do I get here? Starting equipment for being a cleric. Good stuff, good to know. I can have a mace or a warhammer if I'm proficient. I'm going to take a mace because that's something I knew I wanted right off the bat. So right in here is equipment. Now this equipment box is really small. One of the few things I'll say about the character sheet in 5th edition, not a ton of space for equipment. I know there's other places you can put more gear further down. What I tend to do in this equipment box is I keep non-weapons and non-armor down there. And up here, where you've got a little box for attacks and spellcasting, is where I'm going to put my armor and weapons. So I'm going to put my mace up here. What else do I get? Scale mail sounds good to me, so we'll put in scale mail. A light crossbow and 20 bolts, or any simple weapon. Yeah, I'll put the crossbow. We'll go light crossbow. A priest's pack or an explorer's pack. I think I'm gonna have to go with a priest's pack. That makes sense. And again, because this is sort of the adventuring gear, I'll keep it down there. But again, whatever your preference. Some folks like to use the back of their sheet for equipment because they're just using it so much. Oh, I've used this many torches, I have this many rations, and there's a lot of erasing. So putting it on the back of the sheet can be a good way to help. And I get a shield. So I am, of course, going to take that shield because I was excited to have one. Now, I don't necessarily know what any of these things mean in terms of mechanics. I don't know what the rules are yet or what the numbers are associated with them, but the class tells me that those are the things that I can have. I'm making these decisions, and then I'll go look them up in the player's handbook. I'll go to the index, or I'll go to the table of contents. What does a mace mean? What does it do? And that sort of thing. So we've got the basic equipment, the basic gear. So let's punch in some of this in terms of detail. So I've got a shield, and I've got scale mail, both combined. They're going to make me harder to hit. So we're talking about armor class, which is up here, which is one of the central sort of numbers that you can see. Armor class sort of reflects just generally how hard it is for you to get struck by standard weapon attacks. So it doesn't really apply to all spells, which can affect your mind or different things, but getting hit by an arrow, a sword, someone tries to, whack you with a battle axe or something like that. Your armor class is sort of a reflection of the physical armor you're wearing, as well as your ability to dodge, parry, all those different things. So there's a lot of different places that contribute to your armor class. One of them is dexterity, of course, because that's how quick you are on your feet, how good you are at moving around. I have a dexterity modifier of 0, so I'm not getting a whole lot. So my base armor class always starts at a 10. Because my dex is nothing, I don't get anything added on top of that. So when a monster tries to attack me, for instance, they roll their d20, and they're trying to hit this number. If they roll higher than my armor class, then the attack lands, and I take some damage, which I don't want to happen. But I'm wearing scale, and I've got a shield with me. So let's look up in the equipment sections, checking out what this means. So scale mail, it says I get a 14 as my base instead of a 10. So while I'm wearing that scale mail, my AC is a 14, not a 10. Okay, that's getting better. 14 out of a 20-sided dice, that's tougher to hit. And a shield gives me a +2. So we're gonna put that +2. So I now have a 16 armor class, which makes it that much harder for me to take damage. That is right, Squeaky. So now I've got my armor class as a sort of standard number. And there's spells, there's things that can increase that can decrease that, etc. But that's sort of the standard what you're working with your equipment. Now the next box over, initiative. This is who gets to go when, determining the order in combat. So one of the big things, and this is again trying to slow down and keep it down to core mechanics, core basic stuff. Often when you're playing at a table, D&D or another game, there's no real sort of taking turns. Everyone is sort of able and free to talk and interrupt one another, and it's this sort of collaborative discussion that you're all having. And there's not a lot of like micromanaging who gets to speak when. There's no conch, if that makes sense. The only exception is when you're in a fight. So because fights have such a higher risk, there's so much more consequences involved to your character, there's generally a system of initiative where you have to go one at a time. So you go around the table taking turns, declaring your action, what it is your character wants to do. Similarly, the GM, the game master, or the dungeon master, they have to take turns as well, so they can't say, just by speaking faster, oh, all the goblins attack you, like I'm just gonna roll a bunch of shit. No, we all have to take turns in combat because the stakes are a lot higher. So when you're determining what the order is gonna be within a fight, you roll what's called initiative. Just like every other roll, it's a d20 roll, but you add your initiative modifier. So your initiative modifier is generally only affected by your dexterity score. There's a couple things that change that, but again, that's more deep diving into the rules rather than the sheet. So for the purposes of this, I have a 0+ to my initiative modifier, so it's just a straight d20. Welcome, Roman 143, to the adventure. It is good to have you, my friend. You're a gentleman and a scholar. We are here talking about the 5th edition character sheet. So we're filling in a lot of stuff. So I've got my scale mail and my shield in terms of my armor class. That's all good to go. I want to know what my mace and my crossbow do. So I go to the weapons tables. All that information is there, easy to find. A mace does 1d6 of bludgeoning damage. So I'm going to punch mace into my sort of standard go-to attacks. So mace, it's 1d6 bludgeoning damage. Now, because I'm proficient with the mace, just like my skills and my saves, I add this modifier when I try to hit with the mace, my proficiency bonus. So my attack bonus, when I roll to see if I'm successful or not, is going to be at least a +2. But then a mace is also a strength-based weapon, and this is all in the weapons tables. So it gets another +2, because I add, same concept as with a skill, you take your ability, whether you're proficient or not, and add those to your d20. So I'm going to be adding a +4 when I try and attack with my mace. It's going to be 1d6 damage, and you add your ability modifier, and that's just another little mechanical thing to the damage as well. So that's my mace. Same thing for the light crossbow that I'll punch in. You look it up on the sheet. Where's light crossbow here? In the PHB, or of course in the SRD that you can find. Light crossbow, 1d8, same thing, but it's piercing. Okay, my dexterity modifier is a 0. Crossbow's a ranged weapon, so it's dexterity based. So I don't get any plus from there, but I am proficient, so I get the +2. So I'll take the +2, and then I get a d8 and no ability added to the damage. So now I've got like my most common attacks that I'm going to use the most often written out. And under your crossbow, you could write things like the range, the weight, all that kind of stuff in this little box as well, which this would get kind of crowded otherwise. Now, what a priest pack is, we'll say in the equipment section of the DMG, of the PHB as well. So we've got quite a lot of the class stuff. We haven't done spells or abilities, which we'll get to in a second. But we're missing one more piece. So 5th edition added an interesting element to the mix. Instead of just your typical race class pair to build a character off of, they added background. So you've got race, class, and background. So determining your background, again, you just pick from a list. There's rules for how to design or create your own, but generally you just select from the list that they have, and backgrounds give you certain things. So I'm gonna pick, let me just pull up my PHB because the backgrounds are not in the SRD, unfortunately. Whoop, oh, Will, did we just lose our cap?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, let's pull it back here.
There you go.
There, we should be good there. No worries, hope your dinner's good. Cool.
Oh, yes.
So when I pick a background, I'm just gonna grab a quick one here. Let's go with Folk Hero. So I grab Folk Hero. Same as when I looked at my race and my class, it gives you some flavor text and then it gives you some mechanics, or gives you some bonuses. So first thing right off the bat, it gives you skill proficiencies. So I get animal handling and survival. So just the same as my other skill proficiencies. I'm going to click the little box, tick off animal handling and survival. And then I would punch in the relevant combination of my proficiency modifier and the ability modifier. Folk Hero also gives me tool proficiencies. I'm proficient with land vehicles, artisans tools. I get a set of artisans tools, some extra equipment. I get 10 gold pieces as my starting gold if there's any additional stuff that I wanted to buy. So I can put in my 10 gold pieces down here. Some type of artisans tools, etc. And then each of the backgrounds gives you one sort of like ability. So this one is rustic hospitality, and I know what this means off the top of my head, but I'll just put it down again in, what is this called? Traits, features and traits. So for my background, which is Folk Hero, I've got rustic hospitality. And if you don't want to write it the whole thing, you can just put a page reference, or if you like, you can make some kind of shorthand. But this gives you one little ability that you can use being a Folk Hero. So I'll put Folk Hero up here. Now, just to top off this top bracket here, what does alignment mean? Alignment in 5th edition is kind of an attempt to simplify a moral compass, if that makes sense. So generally the alignment in 5th edition is built off of your 4 quadrants. And again, I'm trying really hard to keep this simple. Traditional D&D presumes that there's sort of 2 polarities that are always sort of overlapping with one another. So you've got good and evil, and then you've got lawful and chaotic. So lawful is, adhering to sort of rules and structure and order. Chaotic is seeing like more justice in the like wild and unmetered and uncontrolled. So those are always opposed to one another, and similarly good and evil. So every character is somewhere on the spectrum between those sort of 4 quadrants. So you can be really, really good, but really dislike rules and the law, so you'd be this chaotic good character, or you could be really evil, but like the very structured, like follow the rules, like order-based, like totalitarian kind of evil. So you tend to pick somewhere on that spectrum. Generally, your GM will have some kind of guidelines or rules as far as what alignments are available. It can be tough if you've got a party where one person is playing a chaotic evil character and the other is playing a lawful good. You get a little bit of friction as well. So you pick an alignment. I'm just going to say lawful good for now, because I believe in the order and the structure of the church and the faith, etc. And of course, good over evil, being a sort of healing cleric. Touchpad says, might be a little outside the tutorial, but how do you generally do with armor ASO? Do you give players a set of money, basically tell them get armor weapons from this money, or do you go pick from what you want and let's go? Depends, it's your call. I find that the guidelines as far as starting gold are a little bit low in 5th edition, so I tend to open it up a little bit, let players select a little bit more if they'd like. As far as standard equipment, obviously I usually don't let people pick magic items from level 1, but I'll say something like roll a d100 or whatever, and that's how much gold you have to spend, etc. But kind of depends on the type of system that you're running, but it's all good. So we are running a little bit short on time, so I want to move more through just showing you around on this sheet. So hopefully I've covered enough of the basics for conceptual understanding for the folks who tend to ask basic questions and they don't want us skipping over. So I hope we went slow enough that you've got a stronger concept of what a tabletop role-playing game is at all. More particularly understanding a little bit of 5th edition. But now I'm just going to show you what else is on this sheet. So personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, fairly intuitive. These are your like rich character stuff. These don't function as mechanics necessarily. These are things you want to think about it. They're great prompts that you've got from Wizards of the Coast that says when you design a character on the first page right at the top, here are some other things you need in mind. Not just the numbers, but you need to understand what is your character's personality like? What are things they hold dear and appreciate? What are they bound to? What are they not particularly liked for, etc. So those are there as well. Again, you've got this running features and traits, which is where you punch in all the cool abilities and spells that you get as a cleric in this box here. The second page has a little bit more room for description. So age, eyes, skin, weight, hair, a small space for a portrait, which is kind of cool. You can draw in a portrait if you like. Treasure at the bottom, again, more of the equipment tally stuff, additional features. On the left-hand side here, you've got the backstory tab where you can write in a little narrative piece if you like. I know some folks are into that as far as where your character came from, what their deal is. Allies and organization, I usually put in the party members. So I'll have like a one line that says like Brad's character, fighter, half-orc, hates Susan's character. And then I'll have Susan and then a description of her character. So all the little things that you need to keep in mind of, what's the dynamic like? How do these party members relate to one another? And then the third page, which I think is one of the more impressive ones relative to previous editions, is this is all just for spells. So if you're playing a fighter and you have no magic, you can just get rid of this third page of the character sheet entirely. It's all just for magic. At the top, you write in what class you get your spells from. So of course, I'm a cleric. Spellcasting ability as a cleric is wisdom, and that's in the PHB there. Your spell save DC, the difficulty class, that's the target number that folks are rolling against to try and succeed to overcome it. That's determined by your ability scores. Again, this is all in the sort of spell content that you'd read for the rules. But as far as the sheet, it's all across the top. The most common things you'll need: your spellcasting ability, your spell save DC, and your spell attack bonus. And then your list of your spells. So they do try to cover here prepared or unprepared. And here I just don't really have time to talk about the spell mechanics and how each class casts differently. But for those of you who are tracking a little bit, what's nice about this sheet, you can tick these bubbles for whether a spell is prepared or not. So you got your spells known versus prepared for that day. Tick yes or no if it's prepared. You've got your total number of slots and then number of slots remaining. So it does facilitate the three different sort of core functions or ways that different classes cast spells, which is kind of cool. So you can have your prepped, not prepped, sort of full list. There's quite a lot of room. I have like fleshed out, I think like a level 15 wizard, and I still had spaces in each one of these levels. So it does account for lots of spells if you've got a big list. But again, you can always continue this onto the back of the sheet. Only thing that there isn't provided here, there's definitely no space to write out what the spells do. So if you are making a spellcasting class, you want to have some type of complementary reference page or something that tells you what the spells do, because your spell has lots of info in it. It's got how far you can cast a spell from, how long does the spell last, how do you cast the spell, does it require material components, is it an audible thing, do you need to do gestures with your hands, how much damage does it do, all the different elements of what the spell is aren't going to fit right here in the spell book. Think of this as like the cheat sheet for your spell casting. But if you go to what's the site called? I think it's D&D Spells. There's a couple really good 5th edition databases that people have put together that compile the full list of all the spells with all their descriptions that you can search. You can make like a custom, like you can make an account on these websites, make a spell book for a certain character, and it has them all right there with the full text description. That's a lot faster to search than having to have a page reference. I know traditionally I would do page references, so I'd say, cool, here's my spell, see page 325. I would open at 325, but that takes a little bit more time than maybe having them all sort of written out. I know folks use cue cards, which can be really great. Here's my spell book. It's my stack of cue cards as a player, so that you can just have it right off the bat. Super easy and accessible. So that there is the 5th edition character sheet, general comments, things that I like, things that could have been better. Again, I like how they combined both mechanical stuff as well as character stuff on the front page. I think it's a big statement. What do you put on the first page of your character sheet? If it's all numbers, and then you can write your fluff later, that says something about the system you're trying to run, the games you're encouraging. Having a nice balance of both allows this sheet to function for both types of play styles. I do like having the expanded features and traits section. There's just like all this extra room for you to be able to write in that kind of stuff. Having a backstory section at all in the character sheet, again, I think is a gesture towards that cool, like character-driven rather than build-driven roleplay, which is great. And again, I like having these tabs and bubbles, trying to compress a spell sheet that covers and includes all of the different ways that spellcasters cast, whether you're a prepared caster or not. But again, I don't think there's ever been a spell sheet that's had room for all of the information of the spells. That's always been an issue. So even though I would say that is a negative, is there's not a lot of space on this spell page, it's a negative that's never really been overcome in a way that's sufficient or compared to having the big online databases, which tend to work super, super well. So I hope this was useful for folks. This was our first attempt at like a really grassroots, sort of from the bottom workshop where we tried not to presume any knowledge. We tried not to presume that anyone understood concepts or terms. It felt a little clunky for us because I guess we're just so used to using these terms casually all the time for how much D&D we play. Lost Store 44, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the adventure, my friend. You're a gentleman and a scholar. If you missed the tutorial, you wanna see how we walked through the 5th edition character sheet, you can check out this video on YouTube later this week. But yeah, I hope this was useful for folks. If you have other ideas for basic style tutorials and workshops, if you want someone to walk you through how the fuck does spellcasting work in 5th edition, let us know. Send us a message here in Twitch. We're here for the next 2 hours. Send us an email. Check out our website. We've got lots of tools and resources, and we only want to build the ones that you guys want. So let us know what works for you.
Mitch, I wonder, would it make sense if we brought the Q&A forward here rather than at the very end? I think it would possibly make sense because folks are all around and asking questions and ideas and stuff. So let's I'll change it on the schedule. So we'll have a little Q&A, and we can talk about some other character creation stuff as well whilst we're waiting for some questions to come in. So if you guys have any questions about